Hey everyone, Rua here with a bonus video. Final Fantasy is a series that, like most RPGs of its kind, draws inspiration from the stories that adorn our own world to add depth to the ones that we experience through them. History and mythology both from across our world can be found in Vana'diel, and in this video I'll be going into just a handful of those I'm aware of. This selection of mine is not limited to REMA weapons, as there are some gems that can be found from Vana'diel's own past. Also, although I do have a thorough education in history and classical studies, my knowledge is not universal. There is no such thing as a global historian, nor is it possible for one to know everything about history and mythology, so I'm very interested to see others' input in this topic in the comments section, and on the forums this video is posted to. Our journey will take us across several continents and to cultures lost and found. Come with me and see if you learn something new. Calabolg, sometimes called Calachog or Hard Cleft, Calabolg was the sword wielded by the Irish hero Fergus mac Roich from the Ulster cycle of Irish mythology. Fergus was, an interesting fellow. He was the tutor and martial teacher to the Irish demigod Cuchulainn, was an absolute tank of a man, and had both vitality and virility in such abundance it was legendary across the Emerald Isle. The Calabolg is described as being a gargantuan broadsword, far too large for any regular man to use. This was a weapon only Fergus mac Roich could hope to wield. Its most impressive feat was during the events of the Tan Buculi, an epic battle between the realms of Ulster and Connaught. During the final Battle of the Tan, the battle in which he refused to fight his former pupil Cuchulainn out of honour, Fergus let loose on the Ulster army and wreaks absolute havoc with the Calabolg. He is stopped midway through his rampage by his foster son Cormac, and, with steam still left to blow off, promptly cleaves the tops off of 3 hills surrounding the battlefield. Here we can see 3 aspects incorporated into the in-game equivalent of his famous sword. The Calabolg is famously destructive, as any Dark Knight with it will tell you. It gives a massive amount of vitality to the wielder, likely referencing Fergus's vigour in battle. The last connection is easily the best though. The Gaelic word for mountain is Tor, and the weapon skill attached to the Calabolg is Tor Cleaver. Both the name of the weapon skill and the animation reference this specific feat from Fergus's time wielding it. Very clever. The Aegis in Greek mythology is the impervious shield of the gods of Olympus. Going by some of its depictions in mythology, the in-game version of it is actually quite accurate. The Aegis was said to have been forged by Hephaestus using the hide of the colossal goat Amalthea. The Aegis was legendarily sturdy, being completely unbreakable to even the most powerful figures in the Greek pantheon, and it was polished to such a degree that it resembled a mirror. This was just the first form of the Aegis, however, as it gained a new power when it was lent to the Greek hero Perseus to aid in his battle against the Gorgon Medusa. This story is quite well known. Perseus was set the task of killing Medusa, the only mortal among the Gorgons, by King Polydectes of Seriphus, a task considered impossible. You see, Medusa was a Gorgon who turned anyone who looked at her to stone, so any attempt to fight her was frankly suicidal. Par the course for Greek heroes, Perseus had the favour of the gods on his side, so he was given the Aegis by Athena to avoid looking at Medusa directly. Perseus carefully decapitated Medusa, and, after turning Polydectes and his followers on Seriphus to stone using her severed head, brought the head to Athena along with the Aegis he was returning to her. Athena asked Perseus if she could have Medusa's head for having lent him the shield, to which Perseus, wise enough to not want to upset a goddess, agreed. Medusa's head and its ability to turn mortals to stone was then added to the Aegis. The in-game acquisition and depiction of the Aegis acknowledges its origins. The Aegis is unique among relics in that the base relic shield is used to spawn a special NM, Amalthea, which, as you'll recall I said a few moments ago, was the name of the giant goat whose hide formed the base of the Aegis. The addition of Medusa's head to the shield is also accounted for, as the Aegis seems to have a face of some depiction on it, with the wisps on it possibly referring to the snakes on Medusa's head. It's really hard to say. However, the final and best reference is in the cutscene where the player finally obtains the Aegis for themselves. Scenes of this sort occur with the completion of each relic, as it involves the previous owner of the relic handing it over to the player. So, who gives the Aegis to the player? Perseus! Chango was the god of thunder and fire, of the primal powerful elements of the Yoruba people of the Oyo Empire. The Oyo Empire once stood where Nigeria stands today, and for well over a millennia, between the 7th and 18th centuries. The natural forces associated with Chango are fire and lightning, primal and powerful elements the Yoruba people saw as encapsulating war, passion, and authority. Shango's most prominent ritual symbol was the Oshe, a double-headed battle axe. Statues representing Chango often show the Oshe emerging directly from the top of his head, indicating that war and the slaying of enemies is his main purpose. Although primarily depicted as a warrior god, Chango also commanded the elements of fire and thunder, being able to call upon flames with his speech. In light of this, the design of the Chango Great Axe is quite accurate. Not only is it a great axe exclusive to warriors, but the axe head itself resembles a flame. Also, and this might be a bit of a stretch, but the fact that upheaval is the weapon skill attached to the Chango could well reflect the upheaval of the Yoruba with their displacement from the continent. This is because in the 18th and 19th centuries, European imperialism devastated what remained of the Oyo Empire, and many of the Yoruba were enslaved and transported to the Americas. Despite all the hardship, despite all the suffering, Chango's worship survives despite all odds, and he still has followers in several parts of the Americas, ranging from Brazil to Haiti. Goro Masamune was a legendary Japanese swordsmith who lived during the 13th century. Legends abound of the weapons Masamune forged, but the most notable one stems from a feud he had with his student Muramasa. Envious of his master's continued prevalence over himself, Muramasa challenged Masamune to a contest where they would both forge katanas and see which one cut better. Their contest was overseen by the monks of a local temple, and the contest was for each to suspend their blades in a small creek with the cutting edge facing the current. Muramasa's sword cut everything that passed its way, while Masamune's sword did not cut anything. Thinking that he had won the contest, Muramasa mocked his master for his apparent lack of skill as a swordsmith. But the monks who had been watching the contest closely declared, much to his amazement, that Masamune had won, because, to quote directly from the tale, "The first of the swords was by all accounts a fine sword. However, it is a bloodthirsty, evil blade, as it does not discriminate as to who or what it will cut. It may just as well be cutting down butterflies as severing heads. The second was by far the finer of the two, as it does not needlessly cut that which is innocent and undeserving." Masamune's swords gained acclaim in Japan not only for their incredible quality, but because they were popularly believed to be divine swords. There are a handful of genuine Masamune swords which survive to this day. Among them is the one given to President Harry Truman of the United States following the end of the Second World War. The Masamune sword he was given remains in the Truman Library in Missouri. Precious little ties the tale of this Masamune sword to the in-game katana which bears his namesake, but one could make the case that the swords Masamune forged were considered the greatest in Japan, and one could also argue that the Masamune is the strongest katana in Vana'diel. The name survives to this day for a good reason after all. The Gjallahorn was the horn of Heimdall in Norse mythology. He blows the Gjallahorn to announce the start of Ragnarok. The Gjallahorn, meaning resounding horn in Old Norse, is one of the most prized treasures of the gods. Heimdall, the god sentry, keeps watch over Asgard day and night with the Gjallahorn in his hand. During Ragnarok, the final battle in which the cosmos will be destroyed and reborn, the giants will march upon Asgard. When Heimdall spots them, he will let out such a huge blast from the Gjallahorn that it will be heard throughout the cosmos. Ragnarok is truly a cataclysmic event in Norse mythology, but for the Vikings, the myth of Ragnarok had profound ramifications for how they understood the world in their own time. You see, Ragnarok carried a deep meaning for the Vikings. It served as a tale and as a model to spur on great deeds in life. Just as the gods will one day die, so too will each individual human being. And just as the gods will go out and face their fate with dignity, honor, and courage, so too can humans. In this view, the inevitability of death and misfortune should not paralyze us, but should instead spur us to hold noble attitudes and do noble deeds, the kind worthy of being recounted by bards many generations after we ourselves are gone. The Gjallahorn is the most powerful instrument in Vana'diel for outright song potency. This, along with what playing the Gjallahorn means as a call to action to inspire people, as a bard in Vana'diel does, aligns with Heimdall's act of blasting it so loud it can be heard throughout the cosmos. Marsyas was the musician who, according to Greek mythology, was the mortal who invented flute music. Greek mythology has a real penchant for downfalls centered on hubris, or a distinct lack of humility from its mortal characters, and the story of Marsyas is often touted as being the best example. You're about to find out why. The story goes that it was actually Athena who created the flute Marsyas was using. She had discarded it because she thought it puffed her cheeks out too much whenever she played it. However, when she saw that Marsyas had claimed the flute for himself and was using it to gain fame and fortune he did not deserve, she cursed the instrument so that its player would meet a horrific end. Sure enough, Marsyas' ego swelled to such a degree that he challenged Apollo to a contest of music, a contest he lost and paid for his hubris dearly. Judged by the muses, Marsyas played his flute and his music was acknowledged as being good by the judging muses. Preemptively gloating over his victory, Marsyas turned to Apollo, who then played his harp. Marsyas was certain that he had won the contest, but Apollo then added his voice to his song, to which Marsyas could do nothing since he could not sing and play his flute at the same time. Some accounts then claim that Marsyas accepted his defeat, but others claim that Marsyas refused to give up the flute as a penalty for his loss. He accused Apollo of cheating by using more than his instrument. Apollo did not appreciate that. He skinned Marsyas alive. There is an in-game similarity to Marsyas' tale. The Marsyas is indeed a useful instrument as it gives the bard honor march, a good song that only it can play. However, it lacks real purpose beyond that. It's a one-trick instrument, even if it is a very good trick. Just as Marsyas thought having a distinct instrument of his own was enough to be the best, a bard cannot operate with a flute which bears his namesake alone. Verethragna. This is a very interesting entry from the ancient Persian pantheon. We're going back a very long time in history for this one, before Zoroastrianism rose to prominence in the region. This was a polytheistic faith, much like the other religions of antiquity, with a pantheon led by the supreme god Ahura Mazda, champion of order, against the dark forces of Angra Mainyu and his legions of chaos. As with other ancient polytheistic faiths, the gods of the early Iranian religion had each their own field of expertise they presided over, and to whom one would pray for specific needs. Allied with Ahura Mazda was Verethragna, the god of strength and victory. Verethragna was considered the greatest defender against the demons of Angra Mainyu. He is depicted in various forms and changes shape depending on the circumstances of battle, with one of his most prominent forms being a giant bull with golden horns. It's clear that someone on the Square Enix development team had a very keen eye for ancient history and detail, as this is very accurate to the way Verethragna is depicted in-game. These brutal hand-to-hand weapons resemble a pair of bull's horns, complete with streaks of gold, which was signature for their namesake. Best of all though, and this is quite brilliant, the weapon skill attached to the Verethragna is Victory Smite. Verethragna was the god of strength and victory, and strength is the modifier for Victory Smite. Very well done, Square Enix, I'm honestly impressed. Lionheart. Now, I imagine most series fans watching this will recognise that name for its appearance as Squall Lionheart's ultimate weapon in Final Fantasy VIII, but its true origin is in medieval history. Lionheart was the honorary epithet given to Richard I of England, one of the most famous and decorated military leaders and kings in English history. As soon as he was crowned King of England in 1189, Richard joined the Third Crusade to reclaim Jerusalem from the Saracen leader Saladin. Richard well and truly stood out among the Crusader leaders, besting Saladin twice in open battle, first at the Battle of Arsuf and again at the Battle of Jaffa. Richard personally led his knights into battle in both of these engagements, refusing to merely observe as other nobles of his kind would have done. Richard's stunning victories forced Saladin to the negotiating table, where both men signed the Treaty of Ramla, which recognized Islamic governance of Jerusalem but also permitted Christian pilgrimages to the Holy City to resume. It is also here where some historians believe that Richard gained his famous epithet of Lionheart, but the matter remains open to debate. Makes sense though considering his actions. There are some parallels one can draw between Richard the Lionheart and this greatsword which bears his namesake. Richard was a bold, brave and cunning battle commander, preferring to lead from the front. He was also known among Crusaders to be an extremely talented swordsman. Leading from the front and being a masterful swordsman sounds like a rune fencer for sure. As I'm on record saying, the Lionheart is a pure DPS weapon, which is very odd for a job, rune fencer, which is first and foremost a tank. Using the Lionheart can put the player at risk, but its effectiveness is undeniable, similar to Richard charging into battle when he really did not need to. To underline this, the weapon skill attached to the Lionheart is Resolution. To be resolute is to be admirably purposeful, determined, and unwavering in your actions. Words which summarize Richard the Lionheart to a T. Loxley Bow. You would be forgiven for looking at this bow and not seeing much to it, but when you look further you'll notice there's a neat bit of folklore behind it. Loxley is a town in the southern part of Yorkshire, England, and is largely agreed upon by historians to be the hometown of the folk hero Robin Hood. Most of you watching have probably got a slight understanding of who Robin Hood was, and frankly that's the case for most. Robin Loxley, his true name by some accounts, was a famous outlaw and folk hero who operated out of Sherwood Forest in the late 12th century with his companions, the Merry Men. The precise origin of Robin Hood is still uncertain almost a millennia after his time. Some believed him to be a peasant who simply had enough of the feudal system, and others claimed him to be a noble who served under Richard the Lionheart during the Third Crusade, but who then fell out of favour with Richard's successor King John. Robin Hood gained fame and great admiration from the peasantry for his acts of stealing exclusively from the rich to give to the poor, practicing socialism before it got all political. Robin Hood's skill as an archer was legendary, being able to split down the middle, an arrow fired with another of his own being one of his most impressive feats. Robin Hood was also depicted as being unbelievably fast on the draw with his bow, and being able to take down several opponents in seconds. These two attributes are reflected on the attributes on the Loxley Bow, with its high ranged accuracy for its level and its extremely fast firing speed. It fires at what feels like the speed of a machine gun. Some career rangers who played back at the level 75 cap might remember the Loxley Bow fondly for the same reasons its namesake would have. It remains a great nod to folklore, popular history in its finest form. Peacemaker. Here we have a weapon which incorporates two historical references at the same time. It's really something. Peacemaker, also known as the Colt Single Action Army, is one of, if not the most famous revolver models in history. The Peacemaker was the first true cartridge revolver, introduced in 1873, and before long it became very popular for its stability, stopping power, and of course the ability to fire up to 6 times before having to be reloaded. This accounts for the in-game version of the gun having the lowest delay of any gun out there. So what about the low base damage? Shouldn't it be higher since the Peacemaker's stopping power was so prominent? This leads us to the second historical nod. On the 27th of February 1844, the USS Princeton hosted President John Tyler, the 10th President of the United States, for a cruise down the Potomac River. The Princeton was notable for having the largest naval cannon around at the time, a cannon called Peacemaker. It weighed in at 27,000 pounds. This trip was marked by Captain Robert Stockton ordering the Peacemaker fired 3 times while going downriver, and it was loaded again to fire a salute to George Washington as the Princeton passed Mount Vernon on its return voyage. However, when Captain Stockton fired the Peacemaker, it malfunctioned, sending red-hot shrapnel tearing through the unsuspecting gathered crowd. The accident killed 5 people instantly and wounded up to 20 more. President Tyler was not among the crowd, as he had been delayed coming back up on deck to witness the final shot. Okay, with this in mind, have another look at the attributes on the in-game Peacemaker. What happened on the USS Princeton was very unlucky, so that explains the 13 damage, as the number 13 is considered unlucky in many cultures. Then we have the 270 delay, which references the fast firing rate of the Peacemaker revolver, but also references the 27,000 pound cannon on the USS Princeton. The +5 to agility can be seen as a reference to the 5 men who lost their lives in the accident, and the -2 to enmity can be seen as a reference to the accident happening in the 2nd calendar month, February. Oh, and how's this to round it all off? The level requirement to equip the Peacemaker is 72. Reverse that and you get 27, the 27th of February. The fact that Corsairs, sea dogs themselves, are the only ones that can use the Peacemaker also lends credibility to this. That is either some serious and commendable attention to detail or an insane coincidence. Which do you think? Okay, that's all for this time. I'll probably come back to this topic in future, but when I do, I want to involve you all as well. I'm just one guy after all. There's much I don't know about the numerous nods and inspirations to our world's histories and myths in Vana'diel. Therefore, I'd like to invite people to contribute next time to cover my own shortcomings. I'll be sure to let people know through the community tab of my channel when I'm considering it, and I'll give contact details to discuss contributions further. Before I sign off, I'd just like to, on the off chance they come across this video, thank the Square Enix development team for Final Fantasy XI for taking the time to care about the stories of our own world. It shows, and it's very much appreciated. Okay, I'm out. I'll see you all next time.